Hello again, everyone. Now, obviously, at the moment, I'm doing the podcast on my own, so this one will probably be shorter than what I would normally hope for it to be. I don't know, it depends on what sort of conversations with myself divulge into, to be honest, because I am doing it currently on my own. But I will warn anyone who is listening to this that topics discussed will be, this is a trigger warning. It's depression, anxiety. I won't be going too much into specifics with it. It's more general triggers towards certain feelings and emotions when one is feeling depressed or anxious. In the description, and I will be putting this in every description, will be the description for the podcast's, playlist, which contains resources that people can utilize. And as I discover more, or guests tell me about others that they have seen, then I will be adding those to the list for people to use. So, uh, you know, if you have been distressed by anything that you listen to today, there are resources to help you with that. So, I wanted to talk a bit today about how depression can affect people in their day to day lives. It's subjective and different to everyone. And to give my own authenticity on this, I'm not going to be speaking off a script, and because I know many cases, having worked in the field of mental health and support working. I don't want to read this off a script. I don't want to do this podcast off a script because I feel it's a bit disingenuous. You know, I don't want to be typing up a whole thing to then read it out and be all monotonous and like as I tried to express in the introductory video. But my experience of observation is very subjective to each individual person. It's a unfortunately, if we could name each individual type of depression based on the person, now that I say it out loud and the thought that's popped into my head, there is a part of me that says that wouldn't work because then that would individualize it to such a degree that help and support may be difficult. But at the same time, it's because everyone suffers differently with it. Person centered care isn't overly a thing in my experience and in my observation of, people that are depressed or anxious. And I'm from the UK, so anyone that lives outside of the UK, at the moment, our mental health, resources are currently mainly done through charity work, purely because the NHS and the mental health sector of the NHS is crippled to the extent of they do not have the funding to support every individual. And the economics at the moment is basically saying that if you are physically fit to work, then you should be working. It negates. I mean, I may be wrong. I mean, I don't really pay attention to the news, but from what I can gather, and comment if I'm wrong, people that suffer with mental health are being told that they should be working, and in essence, they have no excuse, which I don't believe. I don't believe that at all. I've come across many cases where depression can be just as physically crippling as it is mentally crippling. Not to negate people that suffer with physical disabilities in that sense. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's the mind is such a powerful thing that when people say they struggle to get out of bed in the morning, they struggle to get out of bed in the morning. it's not even in particularly because, thoughts and, the thoughts of it all. It's merely how it affects you to a point where when you wake up in the morning and you're led there and it's just another day, you don't want to get up because you don't want to do another day. You've already done the day before, and why do I have to do today? And then you do that day, and then you wake up in the next morning and go, I did yesterday, why do I have to do today? And it's a vicious cycle of, you know, constant exhaustion, whether that be mentally, whether that be physically. Some people sleep too little when they're depressed. Some people sleep too much when they're depressed. There's no linear path when it comes down to how people suffer with depression. And then comes hand in hand with when they're going through their day of having to do something that they don't want to do and it makes them feel anxious to do. Even if it's from as little as walking up to the shop to buy a drink. The idea of leaving the house to do that. And you can't always pinpoint where that comes from. You can go, you can follow the line of, from an emotional point of view, it's, I'm leaving my safe space to go somewhere where I don't feel safe. It's not the fact that some people, it would be because they're scared of other people. Some people would be because it's scared of themselves. Other people is you're going into the unknown even though it's known. If you think back to, if this applies to you, that is, if you go back to when you were kids, when you were children and you were growing up and you were introduced to a new place. So, for example, you did all your shopping in B&Q. That's going to eliminate the point I'm going to make now. If you did all your shopping in Asda, or your parents did all your shopping in Asda, and you're so used to going into Asda, it becomes almost a routine. Every Friday, you go to Asda, and you get your food shopping, you come home, say it's every Friday, after school, you go to Asda, and then you go home, you do your weekend, you do what you usually do, you go to the park, or you go swimming, or you see friends, or you see family. And then you get to Monday after school, you go to B&Q for the first time. Now, for those outside of the UK that don't know what B&Q is, it's basically just a hardware store where you can buy tools and paint and whole kitchens if you really want to. Unless B&Q happens to be everywhere else, but that's besides the point. When you go to B&Q, you're automatically subjected to loud noises, unfamiliarity, and it makes you feel anxious. Most people would assume it to be shy, but that's what they used to call anxiety at some point, as they used to call it shy, being shy. It's like, no, they're trying to find a safe place. Now, obviously, to some children, it was very much you kind of get over that anxiety. No, get over is the wrong term. Overcome that anxiety. And from there, it just becomes added in. You become familiarized with it. When it comes down to depression and anxiety, and this is me making an observation based on what I've seen of other people and personally as well. When you suffer with depression and anxiety and you do something as simple as going to the shop, it's almost like you're resetting the clock of all the things that you were introduced to as a kid. So every time you walk into Tesco's or Asda, or just to do something that simplistic, you've been in the quiet for so long, it's too much. You just want to be in your safe place where you can almost lock everything down or be able to hear yourself think, even if it's thinking about, negative things. That's my kind of 2 cents on it. Obviously, the more severe types of, agoraphobia and the inability to leave the house, or people that are neurodivergent that suffer with ADHD that get overstimulated going out, which causes them anxiety and depression. There's no set process for what triggers what. And this is something that I think, and this isn't to go against professionals, but this is what I think some professionals have a habit of doing, is assuming that it's a step-by-step process. It is, but it's not always in the same order each time. It's not a circle. Well, it could be a circle. It could be its linear path, but then it could be triangles roped into it. I don't, I I would provide a graph. I mean, when I get my own studio, I'm going to have a whiteboard so I can visually show you this sort of thing. I mean, I speak with my hands, so when you're listening to me talking about this, I am wailing my hands around because I'm grasping ideas from my mind and vocally expressing them to you. So, and that's it. You know, when it comes down to how people are and how people overcome their inhibitions, or even if they learn to cope with them better, it doesn't necessarily suggest that it goes away. You know, there's the argument of once you have depression, you're depressed for the rest of your life, sort of thing. It's not, no. You know, some people have also argued it's a type of emotion, which, I would argue for and against that. Obviously, these are conversations that I've had with people over the years. That's another thing. With, how do I put it? I want to be able to speak freely without the need for, unless it's warranted, for the need for people to discuss research. Because research collects the majority, misses the minority, and ignores it. So, yeah, in essence, there are strict. It's quite difficult to conceptualize. There are strict procedures that are followed when it comes down to describing behavior. But like with everything else that I've spoken about so far, behavior isn't linear, neither is depression, and neither is anxiety. Behaviors could trigger an anxiety, which then triggers you to become depressed. Depressed causes you to behave in a way that ends up making you feel anxious anyway. And the behavior, because you're depressed, causes you to be anxious afterwards. some people would stick to the anxiety. The depression is causing the anxiety, which is then causing the behaviors. Which, in a generic sense, I would just say that's okay, but in a broad sense, it's subjective to the person. Something that I've always said, that I've that I coined, is moods can be justified, behaviors can be explained. So if someone's, say for example, you've been told that you've got to stay at work for an extra couple of hours right before the end of your shift, your mood is going to switch from happy that you're leaving work to angry that you're having to stay in for 2 hours, or that you've agreed to stay for 2 hours reluctantly. So your mood is going to be justified from that. If you reacted in such a way that brought any person to harm, the behavior can be explained, but it can't be justified. Why has he reacted like that? It's because he's been told that he has to stay for 2 hours. If that makes sense. If that makes sense to you. Leave a comment if that does, if that makes sense. So with that being said, if someone, say we're describing depression as a mood, you're depressed, you've been told you've been told to go up to the shop, but you don't want to because you're depressed and you start freaking out. The anxiety in this instance, I'm not saying this is what it is, the anxiety in this instance being the behavior and depression being the mood, you can explain why the anxiety has occurred and justify it based on the mood. To put it in another sense, but doesn't make certain behaviors or certain reactions to things okay. It's just there is a distinct difference between the two, and it's something that I feel is not looked at. I mean, I could probably spend ages looking at research into it, but as an individual, eliminating the degree that I'm studying aside, you ask anyone about anything to do with emotions or mood or anything like that, they'll give you a generic answer because it's not something that they would have often thought about. In a general population, it's easy enough to define, it's easy enough to establish, where you walk into through town, you see a homeless person fighting a policeman because they're being told to move. But, their behaviour in that moment of fighting the police officer can be explained, and their mood can be justified because they're being told to move when, they're homeless and where they're going to be moved to, sort of thing. It's subjective, but it can be applied to any given scenario. Does that make the situation of the homeless man fighting the police officer okay? That is a debate for another day. But the principle behind what I'm trying to say is there. The principle, the premise of what I'm trying to say. And using everything that I've just described in that sense is, how do you challenge that? How do you utilizing that, that term, moods justified, behaviors explained? How do you challenge that in, a depressive and anxious frame of mind? Now, it doesn't work for everyone because everyone is different, but it's learning to understand the triggers and reactions towards certain things. So let me give an example that I'm trying to quickly come up with off the top of my head. I mean, you'll get this a lot over the course of until I end up talking with someone. I'm thinking of everything on the fly. I'm trying to think of everything off the top of the dome, and I do have a nasty habit of going on really ridiculously long tangents before dialing it back. I apologise in advance for that. That's just the way that I am, I'm afraid. But obviously, I use those tangents to figure out my next point that I was going to lead to. So let's go with the example of, you woke up, you're feeling really sad, for example. So you don't want to get out of bed. So in this instance, say you wake up the next morning after having an argument with someone. And in this particular case, with this depressed and anxious person, that they've woken up feeling sad and their mood can be justified, and they've decided to stay in bed all day. And that behavior can be explained by their mood, which can be justified. It's like a zigzag. Again, I wish I could visualize it for you. I would be spending hours, and these episodes wouldn't get released if I was visualizing every single thing and putting it into a graph and then putting it into an edit. The whole point of doing the podcast is to, maybe you can visualize it for yourselves, and eventually it will get to a stage where, as I say, with my own studio, I can provide a whiteboard, I can visualize these things in my head that I described. So, from there, from the person being in bed because they're depressed because they've had an argument and they're feeling pretty anxious from it the next day because they don't know what's going to happen now. Where do you go from there? Now, some people will just stay in bed all day, which isn't a wrong thing. This is that trying to break down that stigmatism when it comes down to people that are depressed. If someone is depressed and has stayed in bed all day, it is not a bad thing. From an outsider's perspective, people would narrow that down to wallowing or, self-pity. Bearing in mind, if a person doesn't have structure or any form of routine, unless they're getting out of bed to do something that interests them, why are they going to leave their bedroom if they have got nothing to do? If they're a type of person that hoards snacks in the bedroom, they're gonna eat the snacks all day, hoard snacks and drinks, so they don't have to leave the bed. It's like squirrels when it comes to hoarding nuts in a tree, so when they hibernate, they can wake up to a good meal. Similar sort of thing. So it's okay, it's breaking down that stigmatism that being in bed all day is a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. I don't believe it's a bad thing. So unless you have something to do that's going to push you to get out of bed in the morning, yeah, it's totally understandable. But, the thing that I would say in this scenario is, if someone provides you an opportunity to do something, Even if you're not going to enjoy it, just take it. Because then you've gotten out of your bed and you've done something. Even if it's minimal. Now, the idea of that seems a bit odd. Because it's like, put it for example, person's woken up sad, after having an argument with someone, so they're spending all day in bed, so their partner will basically say, all right, let's go out for the day. Go out for the day, bring a friend, right? I'll pay for it. Do whatever you want to do. Let's go and do something. Let's get you out. Let's get you somewhere. That thing that you've then done has gone towards improving mentally. Because you've gone out of bed, and even if you've done something that isn't significant, it's still doing something of significance. Even if productivity is defined as what a person does, does within their routine, within their, within their selves, but I would class going on a leisure trip when you're feeling sad as being productive because you're trying to find a way to have a bit of dopamine, have a bit of serotonin. Now, if this is like a continuous process of where you're just depressed and going on leisure trips, at least you're getting out of the house and doing something. It's not to negate how anyone feels. It's not to negate, I'm depressed, I can't go out. It's flipping that and going, I'm depressed and I have gone out. I've, seen the world. And one place I would recommend is Bewley for that. Anyone that's living in the UK. Bewley, fun for the whole family sort of vibe. But yeah, that's the gist of it, is explaining the behaviour, justifying the behaviour, not necessarily doing something about the behaviour or the mood. It's just shifting it and adding something else in there. Being able to smile through pain, being able to laugh through anguish. Once you get to do that, it's a very powerful thing. Now, I'm no motivational speaker because I'm sat on a laptop when I should be doing the washing up, recording a podcast about mental health. So this isn't a motivation, practice what you preach sort of thing. This is literally just a, listen and, listen and digest it, consume it, indulge on it. Interpret it in any way you want. Because at the end of the day, when you are sat there on your darkest of days, on the loneliness, on the, in the bad times, whatever you decide to call it, you can have that. But just do something. Just do something. It's there. It's going to be there until you decide you eventually want to confront it. But the little things is taking time to appreciate the little things, whether that's from people, whether that's from yourself, whether you decide after an argument one day you're going to go and have retail therapy. You're going to buy yourself a bunch of useless things. You're going to sit there and you're going to enjoy it. But at the same time, it's learning to enjoy and appreciate life in a headspace that you are currently in. And I understand that obviously this is a lot more easier said than done. But it's your first steps. If you're someone, for example, that's out of work and you're in that, to oversimplify it for a minute, of being anxious and depressed and you don't really want to do anything, then start by creating a routine of doing something that brings you a form of enjoyment first, before going out and trying to seek some form of structure and routine of something that societal wise is a necessity. Don't force yourself into. No one wants to be working. No one wants to be, doing the mundane routine. So don't start by doing the mundane routine. Start by doing the leisure one. Give yourself a reason to get up every morning from doing something that brings you a small sense of enjoyment. Even if you wake up at 9 o'clock and you spend 2 hours, 2 hours from doing housework to, and if you have the ability to, sitting in the lounge, leaving the confinements of the bedroom, sitting in the lounge and watching TV. And then go back to bed. And then it increases from 2 hours to 3 hours. Or playing a game, getting out of bed, getting dressed, getting showered, and then going to play a game for a couple of hours. Make yourself something to eat, game a little bit more, go to bed. The point I'm trying to make is productivity is how you deem it to be productive. If you think you've done something productive on one of your lowest days, even if it is getting up, getting dressed, brushing your teeth, having something to eat, sitting down, watching a couple of hours of TV, even if it is that mundane, it's still being productive. You're not just led in bed on your phone doom scrolling all day. Which I will say is very easy to do. It is very easy to do, and I understand that. This, that it's the little things. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's the little things that allow you to start a process of healing. Obviously, healing from trauma is a different ball game altogether, and that is another conversation for another day. But it's starting off on little things and turning them into big things. Something that my partner once said to me, which was very out of pocket: if you overthink on the little things, the big things will seem unachievable. And I will make that a quote for this episode, especially surrounding depression and anxiety. If you overthink on the little things, the big things will seem unachievable. Now, if you have any mantras like that, comment them down below. Obviously, I'm bulk recording these episodes at the moment, so by the time they're released, you'll be listening to them. I may or may not have had emails asking to join. But remember, towards improving mental... I'm going to have to work on my own outro. That is quite funny. But remember, towards improving mentally every day, it takes time. I will see you guys next week.